Welcome to Massive Beers. My name is Matt. We do beer stuff. That we do. North Coast Old Stock. A little bit of barrel-aged North Coast Old Stock. More specifically, their 2018 Cellar Reserve aged in rye whiskey barrels. It's been a hot minute since I've done a Old Stock Cellar Reserve. I don't remember the last one I did, but I know I've done the rye whiskey barrel variant. Might have been a 2014 bottle, give or take, 13 maybe. But I went to this bottle shop. It's weird. I go to this town that's not super far away from where I live. It's called Newton. It's probably about half an hour away. I go up there randomly for stuff from time to time. And it was maybe a month or two ago. I was driving through the town. I was like, that's a gigantic whiskey beer store that I've never noticed. And for some reason, I never knew this place existed. I go into it and they have a crazy amount of stuff. And they had this sitting on the shelf. Not only did they have this sitting on the shelf, but it was like way cheaper than they typically are. These are usually north of $20 a bottle. This is well south of $20 a bottle. So I figured might as well pick it up. See what we got going on here. Let's take my mic, put it down. Works a little better when it's down in position. But yeah, Old Stock is their Old Stock Ale 2018 Cellar Reserve from North Coast Brewing Company, Asian whiskey barrels. 13.5%. Old Stock Cellar Reserve is a small batch limited release that has been aged in rye whiskey barrels. This aging process gives it world-class beer and added a layer of complexity. A memorable drink that should be enjoyed as a completely unique offering. Y'all know my love for Old Stock. Is my Micah beer, my son's beer. I'm reviewing every year until he turns whenever. And the Cellar Reserve series, I'm a fan of. There's been some misses for me, but the hits are absolute hits. The 2009 is probably one of the best beers I've ever had. It was 2009 or 8. I don't think I ever reviewed that one. But regardless, we're going to dive into this sucker. Let's see what we got going on. Just brute force it. Let's see how it goes. I don't think there's a cork. I think it's just a cap. Let's see if we can just dive in this sucker. Usually I have a pull tab on here. That's what I was looking for initially. There we go. There we go. Yeah. So let's see what we got. Okay, lighter. I thought it would be a little bit darker, to be perfectly honest with you. You're talking about 2008. Now, as we're sitting right now, it's 5 years old, but it was also barrel aged, so I thought it'd have just a little bit Scotia darkness to it. Still the classic Old Stock labeling, specifically this barrel aged ones. That original one I was talking about came in this cool kind of gray pewtery kind of bottle with a much different kind of screen printed label. They've all been like this since, and but I'm pretty sure that recently, because they don't come out with these every year, I believe. It's kind of every couple of years. I think now on they're moving these to 12-ounce bottles specifically. So anyway, I dig the labeling because it's old school as far as that beer goes. Yeah, I mean, what's all the part of a big barley wine? I said it was really clear. It's not that clear, but how it poured, it ended up coming off clearer than I expected it to be. It has that nice kind of turbid doo-doo brown thing going on that I covet when it comes to these older kind of barley wines. Malted malt ball colored head. Let's even get a nose on it. That smells delicious. That smells absolutely delicious. Man, that smells good. My little thingamajig work on this? No, it won't work. This smells fantastic. Absolutely 100% fantastic. It has that rich kind of caramel, figgy, datey-ness that's airing heavily towards almost a spicy, and I believe that's the rye barrel working there, spicy kind of nougaty kind of sugar daddy vibes. Don't drink a ton of rye whiskey, so I can't hear and speak to the particulars of what rye whiskey does, but as far as beer and whiskey goes, pretty much on par. On brand. Yeah, it has this nice kind of like a reddish kind of cherry kind of fruitiness to it. That's typically what I get from most whiskeys, a la most specifically bourbon. But it has this kind of nice kind of rich red fruitiness that adds to this kind of sugar daddy kind of date and figgy kind of thing going on with this nice big bold sweetness. But there is that small, not small, but relatively small based off of how big this beer is, kind of spicy component. It makes me think that's the rye really at play. It honestly just comes off as this really well done, aged, violent. Violent, I believe, is the word I'm looking for here. Just big beer. Big beer. I'm just going to dive in because I think I'm going to enjoy this one. Let's dive in. Cheers, y'all. That's good. I gotta take a couple sips. Sorry that I'm petting my glass. It's kind of weird. I forgot I had my fan on. That's better. This is a cool beer. It's not like Hair on Fire gonna change my perception of what barrel aged barley wine can do. It's not Kunin. It's not like Revolution level kind of just like crank the volume to 11. Where this takes things is a little bit more reserved, a little bit more adulty. Those beers, those big, huge barley wines that tend to be like, again, Hair on Fire kind of crazy stuff. Well, absolutely fantastic, and I love them so much, are all about just straight up violence. You know what I mean? Just assault on the senses of just barrel here, beer there, just shit shooting everywhere. And it's just, you can't help but just be assaulted by the senses of what those beers do. And while this beer is not meek by any stretch of the imagination, it's a little bit more contemplative. Sit back and think about things. It's a little bit more porty, a little bit more sherry, a little bit more, fortified winey in that sense. And that it has a lot of layers to it, but they're a little bit more discerning. They're not, cranked to that maximum. I can dig on that. Yeah. Yeah, the rye whiskey is really apparent because, while my experience with rye whiskey is very, very minute compared to a lot of different people, my basic kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, take on rye whiskey is that it's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit sharper, a little bit, for lack of a better term, harsher. Now you're getting that here. The whiskey is apparent. It's like, if I'm going to drink any whiskey whatsoever, it's going to be more Scotch whiskey, Speyside Scotch, not all that kind of peaty stuff. And the newer, non-aged stuff tends to be a little bit sharper, a little bit more kind of just cuts a little bit more. And that's kind of how rye whiskey has come off to me when I've drank it compared to just, a straight bourbon versus a rye bourbon, something along those lines. That's how it works for me. Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know, but that's how it comes for me. And you're getting that here. Again, not a harsh beer, not a harsh whiskey, but you can tell that there's a little bit more of a fine edge on the whiskey when you actually drink this beer. There's a really decent amount of it stops short of being coconut, but it's like a vanilla coconut thing that is really, really cool. So that's probably my favorite part of this, is that it has this kind of cool kind of vanilla airing in the coconut, but stopping short of being that super coconut that you get from a lot of kind of barley wines and bourbon barrel age. I'm looking at Usakaba. Those kind of things, you're just stopping short of that, but it's definitely there. Mouthfeel and carbonation are 100% on. It's never going to be confused being this super dense of the world stouty kind of thing. It's a barley wine. It's not supposed to be that. At the same time, it has this nice mouthfeel to it. And it has a really beautiful carbonation. So you're not losing this kind of experience. A lot of times when it's overcarbed, they can just kind of temper a bit of that flavor. Undercarbed, you can actually get a little bit more flavor, but you lack that little bit of kind of chutzpah to the beer. And this one perfectly carved. So with this being several years old, it's still, aging quite well. And from the base beer component, you are getting that kind of leaning into that sugar daddy thing, but you just aren't there yet. It's more of a blackstrap molasses, a little bit spicy again. That's your rye coming into play, but a little bit spicy, a little bit kind of not bitter, but it has these more mature kind of herbal, kind of like bitters. When I say bitters, think of like bitters like in liquor bitters, and a minimal way, kind of herbal kind of component to it. That is very much kind of English barley wine before it gets super, super old. I mean, you're talking about 5 years on this now, so it has a decent amount of time. I actually have some 2018 base old stock. Maybe I should have actually reviewed it with that side by side. But in general, it's a really, really well done beer. Really, really tasty beer. And honestly, for me, at the price point I've gotten this at, like I said at the beginning of the review, it's typically a plus 20 beer price-wise for me. This is very much a negative 20 beer when I picked it up. At that price point, this thing is killer. That $8 swing, essentially, instead of being 24, is more like 16. That's where this beer is kind of like a sweet spot for me. And it just comes off really nice. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm a big fan of the bourbon. They kind of switch hit on this beer. They go bourbon, rye. They kind of go back and forth. And they do some kind of multiple variants depending on a year. But the bourbon is really kind of where the wheelhouse is for me when it comes to this beer. But it's probably one of, if not the best rye iteration I've had of this beer. And very tasty, very fun. Glad I grabbed it. It will not go to waste. Let's put it that way. So, yeah. Let's talk about it. I mean, a nice aged English barley wine, or I should say old ale. It's more English barley wine than old ale. That is true to the form, very much in line with the Cole Old Stock Hardy's kind of vibes. A little bit still green around the edges. Could use a little bit of time, but who knows how this barreled version will take or progress over time. But very tasty stuff. I wouldn't hesitate to pick it up if you saw it on the shelf, especially if you like these styles of beers. And just say, have you had a bunch of old stocks? Have you had a bunch of aged old stocks? Have you had a bunch of the barrel-aged old stocks? Have you had this 2018 version? If you had any of that stuff down there, let's talk about it. So there you go. A review in the books. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Like I said, down there if you want to talk about it. Hopefully you're enjoying a good beer right now. Hopefully see you next time. Cheers, y'all.